All right, so you're planning your next move and you've decided between Huntsville and Greenville, South Carolina. Now, it's really hard to pick between these two. I've had a lot of clients that have looked at one versus the other. As a matter of fact, they're the top rivals between each other. Today, I'm going to make that decision a lot easier for you. We're going to compare and contrast these two great cities, and we're going to talk about the pros and cons of living in one versus the other. That way, by the end of this video, you're going to feel a lot more confident in your decision between these two cities. Hi, I'm Cameron Walker, your favorite Huntsville realtor. Right out of the gate, that lets you know I have a bias towards Huntsville. But at the end of the day, tens of thousands of people move to these cities every single year. You can't make a bad choice between the two. I want to help you make the most informed decision, and if that winds up being Greenville, South Carolina, great. I know some amazing agents there I'd love to put you in touch with. If it winds up being Huntsville, Alabama, amazing. I'd love to work with you myself. So let's get into it. At the end of this video, we're going to talk about some of the things that are really similar between the two cities. And I get that. They're very similar cities. There's a lot more in common than there is different. So let's start off by talking about the things that differentiate the two cities. There's going to be three main things. Number one is going to be the size of the city. When we talk about size, we mean both the physical space of the city as well as the population. Number two is going to be the economy. What types of jobs are available in these areas and how's the economy comprised? Number three is going to be the cost of living. And this is where I see the most inaccurate information online. There's a lot of assumptions made in those types of calculations, and they're using data from a couple years ago. This leads to inaccurate and untimely information, whereas my channel's mission is to give you accurate and timely information so you can make an informed decision about making your move. So let's dive right into it. The number one thing that you're going to see the big difference between these two cities is going to be the size of them. Huntsville has 3 times the population base that you see in Greenville, South Carolina. Greenville's got a little over 70,000 people. Huntsville has a little over 210,000 people. And while you would think this would make Huntsville much more densely populated, the exact opposite is true. Huntsville's almost 10 times the size and landmass as when we're looking at Greensville, South Carolina. So the population is spread out much more thinly. In Huntsville, you're looking at about 980 people per square mile versus in Greenville, South Carolina, that's over 2,370 people per square mile. Now, this is neither a pro nor a con for either city, but it's going to impact your lifestyle. Greenville, because it's much more compressed, everything's really downtown. This is super convenient. It makes the city much more walkable. It means you have a lot more options within walking distance. If you show up downtown, the restaurant you wanted to go to is full. There's a dozen other ones that just in eyesight that you could pick from. Also gives you a lot more variety in a much more narrow space. Also means a lot of their events, festivals, things like that are really in one central location. So from a convenience factor, if you live near that in Greenville, it might be something that's a big draw for you. Versus in Huntsville, we have at least as many restaurants and event spaces and different festivals, things like that you see in Greenville, but they're more spread out across the city because there's 220 square miles of Huntsville. Now, a big chunk of that is land that Huntsville has annexed over the years in surrounding counties and suburbs. Even given that, Huntsville is many times larger than Greenville. So you wind up in Huntsville feeling like there's a different lifestyle depending on what part of Huntsville you live in. Southeast Huntsville has a lot more of, say, a suburban feel. Downtown obviously has a more metropolitan feel. Northwest, again, you're feeling a little bit more suburban. Northeast, you're almost feeling rural. There's not a lot of housing developments out there yet, although there's coming more out there. You're going to see horses and cows in that direction. And then Southwest is going to be a much more typical suburban feel with newer construction just off the arsenal. Versus in Greenville, a lot of it is going to feel metropolitan, it's going to feel urban, and that's a great feel for a lot of people with high-rise condos, high-rise apartments, scattered single-family homes. It is going to be a big difference when you're looking between the two. This is going to impact your lifestyle. You know, whether you're looking to be walking distance to work, shopping, entertainment, groceries, you're not going to be as car dependent, especially if you're in that downtown city center when you're in Greenville versus when you're in Huntsville. Now, this impacts all the surrounding areas too. Huntsville is going to have a much larger population base surrounding it as well. Matter of fact, the largest suburb to Huntsville, which is Madison, Alabama, has almost the same population base as the entire city of Greenville. So where this is going to lead to is a little bit more traffic. Now, Greenville's residents have started to spread out to some of the surrounding suburbs there. Their average commute time daily is about 24 minutes one way versus in Huntsville and the surrounding areas, it's about 30, but Huntsville's is on the rise. We do see more new construction going on in the exurbs around Huntsville and actually getting closer to some of the sister cities like Athens and Decatur versus in Greenville, there's still a lot of land to build in, kind of in that inner beltway around it. So people are living a little bit closer into the city. Now with Huntsville, because the attractions, the job centers, the things to do are more spread out around the city, not everybody has to make that commute. Huntsville, our major job centers aren't actually in downtown. They're on the outskirts of the city, and really between the city and Madison. We're talking about things like Research Park and the Redstone Arsenal. Now, we do have a lot of jobs in downtown Huntsville, so don't get me wrong there. A lot of our industrial jobs, a lot of our logistical jobs, shipping, receiving, those are on the outskirts of town or actually in the neighboring suburbs. With Greenville, a lot of that is within the city limits. As a matter of fact, like if you look at the two different airports, Greenville's airport's right in the middle of the city, Huntsville's is on the outskirts, 15, 20 minutes away. So it's just kind of to illustrate the difference between the two. So again, this is going to impact lifestyle a lot. It's also going to impact what businesses come to an area. There are certain businesses that in order for them to thrive and survive, they need a very densely packed population base. They can't get by on fewer customers at a time, so they have to be there. So the example I always like to use is Trader Joe's. It took Huntsville a long time to get their first Trader Joe's, and it was because we didn't have that population density that Trader Joe's likes. They really, even though they're commercial and they're spread across the US, they want to feel like that neighborhood grocery store. So they had to wait until we built a space, we populated it enough to make it worth their while to come in. Now, of course, that's happened now, and we do have these miniature versions of city centers all around Huntsville. It's not just downtown. Now, downtown's going to be the largest. It's going to have the condos and the apartments, but you've got to places like the Village of Providence. It's got its own little downtown Main Street center. It's got restaurants, shops, dining options, you name it. There's financial service providers, and it's surrounded by condos, apartments, single family homes, townhomes as well. Same thing we see going on in Mid-City. Now, this is a really new development for Huntsville. There you're seeing things like Topgolf, the Ryan Amphitheater, and there's two brand new large apartment complexes that have just opened there. So they're supporting the restaurants and the different shops that are in that area, and that's actually where Trader Joe's wound up. Once again, there's finally the population density there to make it worth their while. Now, as we spread out into various other areas of Huntsville, you have Town Madison, you have Cliff Farm development. So we're starting to see more of that versus when you're in Greenville, a lot of that is contracted into the city and right there in that downtown area. Now, they're starting to expand out too. You are seeing more of that going on in their suburbs, but it's a few years away from being fully developed, whereas Huntsville's a little ahead there. So again, number one difference that you're going to see between these two cities is going to be the size, the population density, and how that impacts the lifestyle. Second thing we want to talk about is the economy. Huntsville's economy has been growing for years and years, but guess what? Same thing is true for Greenville. The difference is the makeup in that economy. Greenville has always relied very heavily on manufacturing. So you're thinking textiles, different things like that, automobiles, but they've started to transition into more of a service economy. They are getting a lot of tourism year over year, and that has bled more into the service-based economy. So it's allowed them to differentiate and spread out, which is always a good thing, right? You don't want all your eggs in one basket. Now with Huntsville, while we've always had an agricultural background and quite a bit of manufacturing, including auto here, we're really known for our ties to the NASA and space industry, as well as the U.S. Missile Defense and Missile Command, right? Now, Huntsville is largely reliant upon either government jobs or contracting jobs tied to those government jobs. But even we've started to spread out a little bit. The FBI has a large presence here, and it's going to be significantly larger in the near future. And we're just seeing more and more of different styles of businesses moving here. We've become much more of a logistical hub between Birmingham, Nashville, Memphis, Atlanta. We've wound up being a really good hub there. But you're seeing the same thing happening in Greenville too, right? They've got all the different cities there in North, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia as well. So they're actually becoming a logistical hub too. So those are pretty similar. Now the difference is going to be in the jobs available. If you look at the top 10 most in-demand jobs in either city, you're going to have the usual stuff: teachers, nurses, cashiers, service-related jobs. But when you go a step further, you're going to see in Huntsville, you're going to see software developer, engineer, all these different tech and STEM-based positions. Also in Huntsville, while education is important everywhere, and everywhere has their colleges, universities, high schools, what have you, Huntsville has 7 different universities just within the city. And then our surrounding sister cities also have their own universities. So there's a lot more academia here in Huntsville, and that's more highly integrated with the surrounding industries. Like UAH here plays a vital role in assisting implementing different systems from some of the government contractors and even government agencies here. And it's almost a straight highway. Students go into UAH, they come out, and they go into this industry that surrounds Huntsville, right? And there's hundreds, well over 300 contractors and subcontractors here. And again, they're supporting the Army's munition, they're supporting the missile defense, they're supporting NASA, they're supporting the FBI, and they're also supporting the local manufacturing base we have here. So I would say the big difference in the economies there is the size of the economy. Huntsville is significantly larger. There's billions upon billions of dollars being invested here every year, and that's turning into quite a sizable output when you look at our economic base and then what we're able to build from that. Versus Greenville, smaller economy, but you have a lot fewer people, so you don't need as big a pie because you're not spreading it amongst as many people. That said, in a downturn, which may or may not be coming, right, it is nice to have that federal funding, those long-term contracts coming into Huntsville. At the same time, we're highly dependent upon that. So 3-4 years from now, as administrations change and priorities change, Huntsville could be negatively impacted if there is a policy change in regard to that spending and where those dollars go. So you got a little more risk on Huntsville in the long term. I think in the short term, it's much less risk and it's a lot stronger opportunity, especially if you're one of those STEM tech fields, engineering, software development, things like that. Huntsville also has a great business incubator. We actually have several of them, and we have seen, especially our tech companies and government contractors have exited. People that have been there 10 years retired in their 30s and 40s because they were multimillionaires, and we've seen that time and again here. So for those of you in the tech sector, they're always looking for an option for kind of a unicorn, right? Grow this beautiful company, sell it off to a competitor, and retire rich, or go on to start the next company. You are seeing that quite a bit in Huntsville. I don't think you see that nearly as much in Greenville because they don't have that tech background. Not to say there's no tech jobs there absolutely are, but it's tenfold here in Huntsville versus what you have there. When you look up, say, a software dev openings on Indeed or what have you, you're looking in the tens, versus in Huntsville, you could be looking in the hundreds, potentially the thousands, if you start including all branches of engineering, right? So just a completely different vibe between the economies. Now, this leads directly into the cost of living, and this is where I see the most inaccurate information. So Huntsville's average salary is about $10,000 higher than Greenville. Greenville's is slightly below the national average, and Huntsville's $9,000 to $10,000 above. Cost of living is largely predicated on what you make and then versus what your outputs are. And this is where I really see a lot of misinformation online. When you look at things like groceries, gas, utilities, they're largely the same between the two. There's not a lot of variability. That stands to reason. They have very similar climates, and just makes more sense there. Where we see a big disparity is actually in housing pricing and rent. And this is what's throwing it off. When you see these journalists or other people that make these lists, they don't have a financial background like I do. So they're not really digging into their numbers. They're just kind of regurgitating what they saw on a report. So when you take the numbers from 2-3 years ago, yes, the 80 to 90K average price difference in a home didn't make a lot of difference in the monthly payment. But as interest rates have continued to increase in the last 2 years, people getting rates between 6.5% and 8%, and potentially in the future looking at higher, that delta in the housing price makes an even larger delta in the monthly payment. So if you're making $10,000 less on average and your housing payment's significantly more, there's got to be somewhere to save in between that you're saving a significant amount of money in order to offset that delta. And it's not out there. There are certainly things that cost less in Greenville than they do in Huntsville. A prime example of this is going to be healthcare. There's about a 10 to 15% delta on average between healthcare between the two, but that's nowhere near enough to make up the difference for the 10% difference in income, or it's actually $10,000 difference, which is significantly more than 10%, and the difference in housing payments. Rent's higher generally, especially when you're considering the downtown areas in Greenville, and their average price point of their home right now is between $410,000 and $415,000 versus in Huntsville we've been bobbing between $330,000 and $340,000. So you're seeing that 80 to 90K delta between the values of the homes, and it's so significant when you're talking about interest rates in that 6.5% to 8% range, potentially higher in the future. So when we talk about that cost of living, the other factor that's going to go into that, once again tied into the economy, is how easy is it to get a job, right? So with a lot of the work here in Huntsville being contract work, you may come in for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years on your contract, but when that's up, are you going to be able to find another position? Well, the good news is in Huntsville and really in Greenville, both of them have lower than average unemployment rate. Huntsville's is just significantly below. Huntsville's unemployment rate stands at about 1.9% versus Greenville's at 3.3%. Again, not a huge difference, right? They're both below the national average. More than likely, you're going to be able to find another position. But then it comes into what kind of position are you looking for? Again, if you're looking for those tech sector jobs, those STEM positions, those engineering, or even faculty positions at local universities, you're going to have a lot easier time finding those positions in Huntsville and actually having your choice between them versus when you're in that Greenville area. Now, if you're looking for service sector jobs, or you want retail management, or you're looking for manufacturing, Greenville might be the better option for you. So just bear that in mind. It's not just about the percentage of openings, but it's what kinds of jobs are open too. Again, you're more likely to see higher pay if you move here in the Huntsville area, and quite frankly, you're going to have a greater delta when it comes to that pay versus your monthly expenses. So you should enjoy a little bit higher quality of life because you are going to have that lower cost of living relative to Greenville. So again, this all plays back into, the population density. If you have this higher quality of life, you have this more disposable income, where do you spend it? This is where the similarities come into play. Both cities have minor league baseball teams, hockey teams, just all the sports that you would expect. They both have the arenas, they both bring in large acts, whether it be music, comedy, some other type of show. So you see a lot of overlap between those. And then other things people like to do for their leisure time in both cities is actually get outdoors. They're both in the foothills of the Appalachians. They're just coming at it from opposite sides. There's great hiking in both locations. There's great fishing. There's great kayaking and boating. I would say the difference between the two is I think you have more mountains in that Greenville area, whereas in Huntsville they're a little closer in, like we have Montesano in the city. So if you're looking for more hiking options and you're willing to go a little bit further out, you're going to have more of that at Greenville. If you're looking for it to be close in, you have Green Mountain, you have Montesano, Chapman Mountain, Walden Mountain here. So they're closer in. There's miles upon miles of hiking. You're not going to be lack for any, but you would see more of that in Greenville. Of course, Greenville, you've got Skyline Drive, things like that you can tap into. You're a little closer to the coastal area there. You're about 4 hours from Myrtle Beach there versus you're about 6 hours from the beach here in Huntsville. Two completely different beaches. Myrtle Beach is that Atlantic, heavy wave, a lot of wind coming in, versus the Gulf shores that we have here. You look at the white sand beaches down there. They're protected by the Gulf, so you're not nearly as big of waves. It's a lot warmer there. Typically not as much wind coming in. So different vibe between the two. But again, you're going to have the boardwalks, you're going to have all the restaurants, tchotchke shops, all the condos around. So the vibe's not that different. You're just a little closer to it when you're in Greenville versus when you're in Huntsville. Now, when it comes to fishing, this is something near and dear to my heart. Grown up a bass fisherman in Alabama and fished all across the state. When you look at the lakes that are near Huntsville, like Lake Guntersville, largest lake in the state of Alabama, it is 65,000 acres. When you look at the largest lakes around Greenville, they're 350, 400 acres, right? Like that, they're like a puddle compared to some of the lakes that we have up here. So in the Huntsville area, you're going to have a large river system that between locks and dams is broken up into several different lakes. It's going to allow you a lot of opportunity for boating, kayaking, fishing, and it's going to allow the fish to grow larger too. Now, we're in South Carolina, there is some great fishing, but you're not looking at catching like record bass, They're just going to be a little bit on the smaller side. Now, you are going to have smallmouth bass in both. I think you're more likely to catch trout, things like that in South Carolina than you are going to be here in Huntsville. Another really similar thing, and I touched on it earlier, between these two locations is the climate. You're going to have the same heat and humidity in either one. You're going to have the same really mild winters. You're not looking at much snowfall. I think neither one of us got much snowfall last year. We look at about 3 inches on average, 2 to 3. They look at 3 to 5, so you get slightly more there, but I don't think it's enough to make a big difference. More than likely, that's not coming in one snowfall. That's a dusting to a quarter of an inch. It just happens to them a little bit more often than it does to us. So should give you a pretty good broad overview of what's similar between the two cities. And again, I think it's going to be those differences that distinguish one city from the other and what's the right feel for you, that lifestyle that you're looking to lead, and the potential economic benefits of moving in one versus the other. If you got questions about Huntsville, give me a call. My contact information is always in the video description. And if you want more information about Greenville, South Carolina, I partner with several great agents there. As I've said, a lot of people have called me. We've talked about which one's the right fit for them. They wind up choosing Greenville. So I've got a one-way pipeline there of agents that I've worked with in the past that I know will give you a great experience there too. So give me a call no matter which one you're looking to go to. Thanks for watching.